"We came to share your bed," said the 4 virgin Apache sisters to the widowed cowboy. Since then the house felt larger than it was, filled with quiet corners and memories that returned at night. He rose before sunrise, worked until his body ached, and slept when darkness forced him to stop thinking. People in nearby towns knew him as a steady man. He spoke little, paid fairly, and never caused trouble. Some said he was cold. Others said he was broken. The truth was simpler. He had loved deeply, and when that love was taken, something inside him closed. The land became his companion. The horses, the cattle, and the changing sky gave his days shape and meaning. Grief stayed, but it no longer shouted. It sat beside him like an old shadow. That winter came early and hard. Snow covered the plains before the last leaves had fallen. Nights were sharp and unforgiving. The cowboy spent his evenings mending tools, feeding the fire, and staring into the flames. On one such night, as the wind howled against the walls, he heard a sound that did not belong to the storm. It was faint, almost lost in the wind, but it was human. He reached for his coat and rifle, not from fear but from habit. Life on the frontier taught caution. When he opened the door, the cold rushed in, along with 4 figures standing just beyond the firelight. They were women, wrapped in worn blankets, their faces tired but steady. Snow clung to their hair and clothes. They did not move closer, nor did they look away. The oldest spoke first, her voice calm but firm. She said they were Apache sisters. Their family had been taken during forced movement from their land. They had walked for days, hiding by night, surviving on little food. The storm had left them weak, and they could go no farther. They asked for shelter until morning. The cowboy studied them carefully. He saw hunger in their thin frames and exhaustion in their eyes. He also saw dignity. They did not beg. They did not cry. They stood as people who had already lost much and would not lose their pride as well. He stepped aside and invited them in. The sisters entered quietly, staying close together. The warmth of the fire brought color back to their faces. He gave them water first, then food. They ate slowly, carefully, as if saving strength. He noticed their manners, how they thanked him with small nods instead of words. They were young, but not children. Each carried herself with a seriousness shaped by loss. As the night deepened, the wind grew louder. The cowboy added more wood to the fire. The room was small, with one bed near the wall and blankets folded on a bench. He had not planned for guests, especially not 4, but the storm left no room for choice. After a long silence, the second sister spoke. Her words were careful, chosen with purpose. She said they wished to stay the night. Then she added the sentence that would echo in his mind long after the fire burned low. "We came to share your bed," she said. The room seemed to freeze, though the fire still burned. The cowboy did not react at once. He did not understand. He had lived among different people, traded with many tribes, but the way she spoke carried a meaning he could not place. He felt surprise, confusion, and a sudden need to be very clear. He asked her to explain. The eldest sister answered this time. She said that in their way, the words meant sharing shelter and protection. A bed was not only a place to sleep, it was a place of safety. To share it meant to trust someone enough to rest under the same roof, knowing no harm would come. They had no other safe place. They had heard he was a man who respected others. They hoped that was true. The cowboy felt a slow breath leave his chest. Understanding replaced confusion. He nodded, relieved but also aware of the weight of the moment. 4 lives stood before him, placed in his care by circumstance and by trust. He told them they were welcome to stay. He said they would sleep by the fire and he would take the bench. There would be no crossing of lines, no harm, no fear. His voice was steady, and he meant every word. The sisters listened closely. When he finished, they bowed their heads slightly, accepting his terms with respect. One of them smiled for the first time that night, just a small curve of relief. As they settled in, the cowboy felt something unfamiliar stirring inside him. Not desire, not fear, but responsibility. Since his wife's death, he had lived only for himself and his work. Now, without seeking it, he had been given a duty again. The fire crackled as the storm raged outside. The sisters lay wrapped in blankets, close enough to feel warmth but far enough to keep distance. The cowboy sat on the bench, his rifle resting against the wall. Sleep did not come easily. His mind replayed the events of the night, the courage it had taken for them to knock on his door, the trust they had placed in him with so little assurance. He thought of his wife and how she had believed in kindness even when the world was harsh. He wondered what she would say if she saw him now. The thought brought both pain and comfort. At some point the wind softened and the storm began to loosen its grip. The fire burned low, casting long shadows on the walls. The sisters slept quietly, their faces calm at last. The cowboy watched over them not as a guard, but as a man who understood how fragile safety could be. That night marked a change, though none of them could yet see how far it would reach. It was only a shared space, a shared silence, and an unspoken agreement to honor one another. But in a land shaped by violence and loss, such moments were rare and powerful. When dawn began to press light against the windows, the cowboy felt older and wiser than he had the night before. He had not found companionship, but he had found purpose, even if only for a short time. And sometimes that was enough to keep a man standing in a hard world. Morning came slowly, as if the land itself was tired. Pale light slipped through the small window and rested on the wooden floor. The storm had passed, leaving the world quiet and white. Outside, snow lay thick over the plains, softening every sound. Inside the house, the fire had burned down to glowing embers, and the air smelled of wood and ash. The cowboy was the first to wake. He sat up carefully, making sure not to disturb the sisters. His body felt stiff from the bench, but he did not mind. He had known harder nights. He looked at the four women sleeping near the fire. In daylight they looked younger, more human, less like shadows from the storm. Their faces were calm, though lines of worry still showed around their eyes. He stood quietly and began his morning routine. He stepped outside to check the animals, his boots crunching in the snow. The sky was clear now, a cold blue stretching wide above him. Smoke rose gently from the chimney, a sign of life in an otherwise empty land. When he returned, the sisters were awake. They sat close together, their blankets pulled tight around them. The eldest sister greeted him with a respectful nod. He returned it, then set about preparing a simple meal. There was bread, dried meat, and warm water. It was not much, but it was honest. They ate together in silence at first. The quiet did not feel heavy. It felt careful, like all of them were learning the shape of this new situation. After a while, one of the younger sisters thanked him. Her English was slow but clear. She said they had not slept safely in many nights. The cowboy nodded. He said they were safe for as long as they stayed. His words were plain, but they carried weight. As the day moved on, they began to talk more. The sisters shared parts of their story, not all at once, but in small pieces. They spoke of their parents, now gone, and of a village that no longer existed. They spoke of being told to leave land their family had lived on for generations. They did not speak with anger, but with a tired sadness, like people who had already cried all their tears. The cowboy listened. He did not interrupt. He had learned long ago that listening was sometimes the greatest kindness. Though their lives were different, he recognized loss when he heard it. Grief, he knew, spoke the same language everywhere. At one point, the youngest sister asked about the house. She asked if he had built it himself. He explained that he and his wife had built it together, board by board. When he spoke of her, his voice slowed. The sisters noticed this and did not press him. Still, the eldest sister gently asked where his wife was now. He paused, then told them the truth. He said she had died. He said the land had been quieter since then. The sisters lowered their eyes in respect. In their culture, loss was honored, not questioned. One of them murmured words of sympathy in her own language. Though he did not understand the words, he understood the meaning. As the hours passed, small misunderstandings arose. The cowboy noticed how they hesitated before sitting on chairs, choosing the floor instead. When he offered certain foods, they politely refused, then explained why. He learned quickly that some things he took for granted were different for them. Instead of feeling frustrated, he felt curious. The moment from the night before returned to his thoughts. The words about sharing a bed had stayed with him, not because of shock, but because of how easily words could carry different meanings. He realized how close confusion and trouble could come if respect was missing. Later that afternoon, he asked them more about their customs. The eldest sister explained that words were chosen carefully in their way of life. Many things were spoken in symbols, not direct terms. Shelter, fire, and rest all carried deeper meaning. To share these things was to share trust. The cowboy nodded slowly. He thought of how his own people spoke plainly, sometimes too plainly, without care for deeper meaning. He felt humbled. He told her that he was glad they had explained. He said misunderstanding could cause harm even when no harm was meant. The sisters agreed. They said fear had followed them everywhere. Fear of soldiers, fear of hunger, fear of being seen as something they were not. Coming to his door had been a risk. Staying had been a greater one. That night, as the sun dipped low and painted the snow with gold and pink, tension crept back into the room. The sisters spoke quietly among themselves. The cowboy sensed worry and asked what troubled them. The second sister said they had seen signs earlier that day, tracks in the snow that did not belong to animals. They feared soldiers were nearby. Their voices did not shake, but their eyes did. The cowboy felt a familiar tightening in his chest. Trouble was never far on the frontier. He told them his land was out of the main paths. He said no one came this way unless they were lost or searching. Still, he did not dismiss their fear. He checked the area again before nightfall. The land was still, but the feeling of being watched lingered. When he returned inside, he found the sisters preparing to sleep, their movements quiet and alert. That night sleep came even slower than before. The fire burned steadily, casting soft light across the room. The sisters lay close together. The cowboy sat where he could see the door and the window. No one spoke, but understanding passed between them. In the deep of the night, a sound echoed far away. It was distant, carried by the cold air. The sisters stirred. The cowboy stood and listened. After a long moment, the sound faded. Whether it had been human or animal, he could not tell. He returned to his place, but his thoughts raced. He understood now that offering shelter was not just an act of kindness. It was a choice that could bring danger. Still, as he looked at the sisters, he knew he would make the same choice again. By morning, the sound had not returned. The day broke calm and clear. Relief moved through the room like a soft breath. The sisters smiled more freely now, and one even laughed quietly at something the others said. The cowboy realized something then. This was no longer about misunderstanding words. It was about learning each other's worlds, about seeing beyond fear and difference, about choosing respect even when the land taught people to be hard. As the sun climbed higher, he felt the distance between them shrink, not into closeness, but into mutual regard. They were still strangers, still separate in many ways, but no longer uncertain. Part 2 of their shared journey had begun not with answers, but with listening. And sometimes, listening was where real understanding started. The days that followed settled into a quiet rhythm. Snow still covered the land, but the sun now stayed longer in the sky. The sisters remained at the house, not because they wished to depend on the cowboy, but because the roads were still unsafe. Each morning began with small tasks. One sister helped prepare food. Another swept the floor and kept the fire steady. The others gathered water and checked supplies. They moved with care, never assuming anything belonged to them, always asking with their eyes before their words. The cowboy watched this with respect. He had expected silence and distance, but instead he found balance. No one tried to take control. No one tried to withdraw completely. Each person carried their part, like pieces of a careful agreement that did not need to be spoken. At first, conversation stayed simple. They spoke about the weather, the animals, and the land. Slowly, stories slipped in. One sister talked about learning songs from her mother, songs meant to be sung during long walks. Another spoke of the river near their old home and how the water sounded different in each season. The cowboy listened as he worked, fixing a broken fence or sharpening tools. Their words filled the empty spaces he had grown used to. In return, he shared pieces of his own life. He spoke about learning to ride as a boy, about the first winter he spent alone on the plains, about mistakes that had taught him patience. He did not speak often of his wife, but when he did, the sisters listened without interruption. They did not rush him or try to soften his pain. They understood that some memories needed room. Nights remained quiet and careful. Everyone kept their places. The fire became the center of the room, a shared source of warmth and safety. Sometimes they sat near it together, not talking, just listening to the crackle of wood. In those moments, the cowboy felt something he had not felt in years. Not happiness exactly, but steadiness. The kind that came from knowing you were not alone in the dark. One evening, the eldest sister asked him why he chose to live so far from others. He considered the question before answering. He said the land was honest. It asked much, but it did not lie. After his wife died, he needed honesty more than comfort. The sister nodded. She said their people believed land remembered those who respected it. She said perhaps that was why his place felt safe. Those words stayed with him. As time passed, small signs of trust appeared. One sister began humming softly while working. Another laughed more easily. Even the youngest, who had been quiet and watchful, started asking questions about the stars and how he found his way at night. He showed her how to read the sky, how certain stars stayed true no matter the season. One afternoon, while gathering firewood, they noticed tracks again, fresh ones. The sisters froze, their bodies tense with memory. The cowboy studied the marks carefully. He said they were old, made earlier that day but moving away from the house. Still, the fear returned like a shadow. That night they spoke openly about it. The sisters shared stories of being chased, of hiding, of never knowing when safety would end. Their voices stayed calm, but their hands shook slightly. The cowboy felt a deep anger rise inside him, not sharp and wild, but heavy. He could not change what had happened to them, but he could choose how he acted now. He told them that if danger came, he would warn them early. He knew the land well. He had places they could hide if needed. His promise was simple, not dramatic, but it carried strength. The sisters accepted it quietly. In their way, promises were not made lightly. They did not thank him with many words. Instead, the eldest sister placed a small carved stone near the fireplace. She said it was a sign of protection in their family. Leaving it there meant they trusted the space and the person who guarded it. The cowboy felt the weight of that gift. He understood it was not decoration. It was meaning. As the snow slowly began to melt, the work around the house increased. Paths needed clearing. Supplies needed checking. The sisters helped without being asked. They worked hard, never complaining, even when the cold bit into their hands. The cowboy noticed how capable they were, how survival had shaped them into strong, careful people. One day, while fixing a loose board on the roof, the cowboy slipped. It was not a bad fall, but it left his ankle sore and stiff. He waved off concern at first, but the sisters insisted he rest. They brought water, adjusted the fire, and took over the heavier work for the day. Sitting still felt strange to him. He was used to being the one who provided. But as he watched them move through the space with confidence, he realized something important. Trust did not mean always leading. Sometimes it meant allowing others to step forward. That evening, as his ankle rested, the sisters told him more about their plans. They wished to reunite with distant relatives once the land became safer to travel. They did not want to stay forever. Their words carried both hope and sadness. This place had become a pause in their long journey, not the end. The cowboy felt a quiet ache at that thought. He had grown used to their presence, to the sound of voices filling the house. Still, he did not try to change their path. He respected that everyone carried their own direction. The nights grew less tense. The sound of danger faded into memory. Laughter returned more often. One night, they shared stories meant to bring strength, stories of ancestors who survived harsh times by helping strangers. The cowboy listened closely. He realized that this meeting was not as strange as it once seemed. History was full of moments like this, where lives crossed briefly but meaningfully. As the fire burned low, the eldest sister spoke softly. She said that what mattered most was not how long people stayed, but how they treated one another while paths crossed. The cowboy agreed. He said some of the most important moments in his life had been short, but they stayed with him forever. That night, sleep came easier for everyone. When morning arrived, the sky was clear and the air felt lighter. The land seemed to breathe again. The sisters stood outside, looking toward the horizon. The cowboy joined them. No one spoke for a long time. In that silence, he understood that something inside him had shifted. He was still a widower, still a man shaped by loss, but he was no longer closed. Responsibility had opened a door grief had locked. Caring for others had reminded him of who he once was and who he could still be. Part 3 of their shared story was not filled with loud events or dramatic moments. It was built from quiet choices, steady trust, and shared time. And sometimes those were the moments that changed people the most. The change in the air came quietly, not all at once. The snow melted day by day, turning into small streams that ran across the land. The ground softened and patches of brown earth appeared again. Birds returned, first a few, then more. Their sounds filled the mornings, replacing the heavy silence of winter. The sisters watched these signs closely. For them, nature was not just scenery, it was a message. One morning, the eldest sister said it was almost time. She spoke gently, but her words carried certainty. The land was opening again. Travel would soon be possible. Other paths, once dangerous, would slowly become safer. The cowboy felt the weight of those words settle in his chest. He had known this moment would come. Nothing on the frontier stayed the same for long. Still, knowing did not make it easier. They spent the next days preparing, not rushing, but moving with purpose. The sisters repaired their worn belongings and gathered what little they had. The cowboy shared food supplies he could spare. He showed them routes through the land, places where water could be found and areas best avoided. He spoke carefully, making sure his directions were clear. The sisters listened closely, asking questions, memorizing landmarks. They treated his knowledge with respect, understanding it came from years of survival. On the final evening before their departure, the sky turned a deep orange as the sun sank low. The house felt different that night, familiar but already beginning to empty. They shared a simple meal together, sitting close to the fire one last time. No one spoke much. Words felt unnecessary. Everything that needed to be said had already been shared through actions, through trust built over many quiet days. After the meal, the eldest sister stood and spoke. She thanked the cowboy, not only for shelter, but for respect. She said he had given them safety without asking for anything in return. In their way, this was the highest form of honor. She then handed him a small bundle wrapped in cloth. Inside was a hand-carved symbol made of wood and stone. She explained it represented safe passage and good memory. It was meant to remind him that kindness traveled far, even after people parted. The cowboy accepted it with both hands. He did not try to hide the emotion in his eyes. He told them their presence had changed him more than they knew. He said the house had felt alive again because of them. That night, sleep was light for everyone. Memories stirred. Thoughts of the road ahead mixed with thoughts of the days left behind. At dawn, they stood outside together. The land stretched wide and open, shining under the new sun. The sisters adjusted their packs and took one last look at the house that had sheltered them. The youngest sister hesitated, then stepped forward and hugged the cowboy briefly. It was quick and respectful, but full of meaning. One by one, they said their goodbyes. No tears fell, but the moment was heavy. Then they turned and began walking, their figures slowly growing smaller against the horizon. The cowboy stood there long after they were gone. The house felt quiet again, but it was not the same quiet as before. It no longer pressed down on him. Instead, it felt open, like a pause between breaths. He returned inside and looked around. The carved stone near the fireplace remained. So did the small signs of shared time, a folded blanket, a repaired tool, marks of life. In the days that followed, he returned to his work, but something had changed. He found himself humming while fixing fences. He slept better at night. When memories of his wife came, they no longer hurt as sharply. They felt warmer, softer, like light instead of shadow. Word of the sisters never reached him directly. The frontier was wide and paths rarely crossed twice. Still, sometimes he heard stories carried by travelers, stories of women helping others along the road, of kindness offered quietly, of safety found in unexpected places. He never knew if those stories were about them, but he liked to believe they were. Years passed. Seasons came and went. The land aged, and so did he. But the memory of that winter remained clear. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was human. Sometimes, when travelers asked about the carved symbol hanging near his door, he would tell them a simple story. He would say that once 4 strangers came seeking shelter. He would say they taught him that trust did not always come in familiar forms. He would say that sharing space could be an act of courage. He never spoke of it as something heroic. He spoke of it as something necessary. On quiet evenings when the sky turned red and gold, he would sit outside and watch the horizon. He would think of how lives crossed briefly, then moved on. He understood now that not all connections were meant to last forever. Some were meant to change you, then leave. And that was enough. The widowed cowboy remained on his land, still shaped by loss but no longer defined by it. Compassion had found him when he least expected it, and through it he had found himself again. Their paths had crossed for a short time, but the meaning of that crossing stayed. In a hard world, they had chosen respect over fear, understanding over judgment, and kindness over isolation. That choice became a quiet legacy, carried forward in memory, in action, and in the steady way the cowboy lived the rest of his days.